before the turn of the century, before there was a Godman Guild, there was a place called Flytown, a tough industrial neighborhood sprawling along Goodale Street just northwest of the state prison. Some say Flytown got its name from the dirt and the flies. Others said it meant that any unwanted intruder should be prepared to fly for his life. Either way, the name was appropriate in an area of unpaved streets and alleys, run-down housing with little or no plumbing. There were businesses, carriage shops, butchers, grocers, 15 bars, and one dance hall. But no schools and no parks. The children of early Flytown were born mostly to Irish, Welsh, and German parents, though there were others, including Swedes, Italian Americans, and Black Americans. It was the children of Flytown that inspired Anna Cagle, a North High School language teacher and church mission Sunday school teacher, to seek help from OSU and the local schools. When the first neighborhood guild was formed on February 1st of 1898, 2/3 of the $3 memberships were held by women, mostly wives of professors and prominent businessmen. They persuaded OSU President James Canfield to serve as the first chairperson of the guild. This first Columbus Settlement House program was begun in a brick house at 465 West Goodale Street. Its stated purposes were to establish and maintain a home as a residence for persons engaged in an effort to promote a higher life among the people in its vicinity, to bring into friendly and helpful relations with one another the people of the neighborhood, and to cooperate with churches, charitable and labor organizations, and with other agencies acting for the improvement of social conditions in this vicinity. Among the first successes at the rented facility were the Mothers Club, several sewing and social clubs, and domestic science classes. There was a kitchen and a library with over 700 donated books. The mothers helped with everything and had a great deal to do with the Guild's other successes. The resident managers, Mr. and Mrs. Franklin Schott, shared their second-floor space with the boys' game room. Expenses were met from a fund made up of donations, large and small. Each member of the governing council was pledged to raise a minimum of $30. The indoor games and outings to Goodale Park, with occasional trolley trips to Minerva Park, were enough to hold the interest of the younger boys. But fewer of the older boys were attracted to the settlement house in those first years. The Guild, after all, was competing with the bars and dance halls and with the chores and jobs of these young men. The first neighborhood guild was so successful that area businessmen, notably the owner of the Godman Shoe Company, who donated $10,000 in matching funds, were instrumental in reorganizing the Guild's association, and in November of 1900 opened a brand new settlement house with the name the Godman Guild House chiseled over the main entrance. The original plans, calling for a bowling alley, a swimming pool, and a modern steam laundry, were scaled down. Still, there were 2 kindergarten rooms, a smoking and reading room, a game room, a club room for women, a domestic science room, and public bathrooms. In an era when few houses in Flytown had indoor plumbing, the public bath was a fortunate idea which found increasing acceptance. It was the only public bath in the northern half of the city. When it first opened, 50 to 60 baths a month were the norm, but by 1902, the rate jumped to 350 a month in the summer. The new guild facility also had a small gym where classes were organized and well attended, even though fees were now being assessed of 15 to 25 cents a month in an effort to raise funds. Modest fees were assessed for most activities, but in December of 1900, the guild had only $19 in its treasury. This problem was solved when Henry Godman gave the guild additional endowments totaling $45,000. In 1903, the Godman Guild acquired the land immediately to its west and opened the first supervised playground in Columbus. The Young Ladies Playground Association worked with the Guild to form 5 more such playgrounds in the city, and ultimately to the establishment of the City Recreation Department in 1910. In 1908, James W. Wheeler became the head resident of the Guild, a post he held for the next 23 years. Wheeler was successful in starting several major new programs and dramatically expanding the Guild's physical facilities. It was Wheeler who first saw the value of transporting the city kids to the great outdoors for education and recreation. In 1910, he began the Guild's first camp program. Camp Johnson was located near present-day Camp Mary Orton on 11 acres of land donated to the Guild by Mrs. Annetta Johnson St. Gaudens, who wanted to interest the city children in nature and agriculture and forestry by teaching them to love the trees and wild flowers and beasts of the soil. The area was known as Roundstone Run, a magnificent, rugged shale ravine surrounded by wooded farms. The camp was well attended. No fees were charged because Wheeler said that those who pay fees believe that they have paid for the privilege of objecting to the fare, the management, and general methods. A guest, on the other hand, had no right to complain. Teepees and tents were much in evidence in the early days of the camp, partly of necessity, and partly because of the interest in the ways of the Indian, so recently eliminated from the American landscape. People came to the camp for more than recreation. Camp Johnson became a health camp for mothers and children, an emergency hospital, and eventually a dental clinic as well. It was a family camp, and by 1915 it accommodated 450 to 500 guests. The era of the First World War saw many changes in Flytown and the Guild. A large number of Italian immigrants made their homes in the area, and when the Italian army scored a victory at the Piave River, a popular club was named in honor of the battle. The wartime food shortage and soaring food prices stimulated Columbus and the other cities to encourage community gardens. Working with the Department of Public Recreation, the Guild secured from the Olentangy Boulevard Company the use of 40 acres of land west of the Olentangy River for gardens. This rich bottomland stretched from Goodale Avenue on the south to 3rd Avenue on the north and west to the railroad tracks. It was divided into 50 by 100 feet plots. The Italian, Hungarian, Jewish, and black men, women, and children who toiled these plots produced a $15,000 crop the first year. At first, the gardeners tried to run the gardens on a democratic basis, with town meetings and committees to set rules. Before long, though, the gardeners turned to the Guild to administer the program. Each participating family in the 1920s paid the Guild $3 toward tractor plowing, staking, night watchman, and supervisory expenses. The gardens continued in use until they were lost to the freeway system in 1957. The Guild facilities were expanded in the 1920s, adding showers and a new gymnasium. It was the sports program that ultimately attracted and retained many young men in Guild activities. Their parents and friends came to see them play, and eventually a parking lot had to be built for all the cars of visitors. There were boys' teams and also girls' teams, and as these photos show, there were black teams and there were white teams, but the teams were not integrated. The same was true of the drama programs, the musical programs, and all of the Guild programs. The Guild provided a lot of opportunity for everyone, but only on Sundays could black and white neighbors and families get together at the Guild house. In this policy of segregation, the Guild was merely a sad reflection of the times. Worst of all, as many in the white community became defensive about the large migration of poor black citizens from the southern states, and many were frightened by the rioting in other cities, a policy of whites only was established at the Guild's camps, until Camp Wheeler was opened to blacks in 1927. Over the years, as the Guild grew and changed, so did the social services world. The funding of agencies was growing more centralized, making each agency somewhat less independent. The development of compulsory education and accessible schools, as well as the city parks and recreation department, made some of the Guild's services less necessary. During the years of the Great Depression and after, Guild activities began to change from the club orientation to larger groups, partly because of a dwindling supply of volunteers and partly because the economic conditions forced the Guild to cope with masses of people by organizing them in larger groups. From World War II and into the 1950s, the canteen-type programs attracted many servicemen and their families, and the holiday programs took on a special significance. One holiday guest has always been very popular with the kids and with the staff. The 1950s brought dramatic physical changes to the Near North. At the beginning of the decade, Guild officials participated in dedicating the roadside park at the entrance to Camp Mary Orton. But by the end of the decade, Flytown had been demolished as a part of the so-called slum clearance approach to urban redevelopment. The Guild facilities now stood in the way of what was perceived as progress. A new building further north was needed. And the people of the Near North still needed the Guild. Displaced from their homes, impacted by unemployment, inflation, and other societal factors out of their control, they did not share in the prosperity of the 1960s. Some good changes were coming in the 50s, though. As a result of court decisions, the civil rights movement, and the efforts of Guild supporters and staff, programs were gradually being integrated, including Camp Wheeler. For the first time, black and white children could enjoy the fun and the education of the Guild's camp programs together. The change came easiest for the children of the 60s. Two separate camps were no longer needed. Camp Wheeler, though beautiful, was 50 miles away. It was sold, and the integrated programs were combined at Camp Mary Orton. At the ripe young age of 65, the Guild opened its new facilities on 2nd Avenue. The years that followed saw some good programs continued, like the Well Baby Clinic. Other programs were strengthened, such as the preschool programs, so important to the children and the working mothers. Some new programs have been vitally needed and so provided. The Guild has fed not only seniors but children as well. The children needed a playground and were willing to help build it, using materials that were begged, borrowed, or bought, and a lot of volunteer help. A rough-hewn but serviceable playground was built. Times, styles, and programs continue to change, but the Guild's commitment to neighborhood service has remained constant. Randall Morrison became the Guild's executive director in 1974. One of the obvious problems faced by the Guild's neighborhood was the severe deterioration of its aging housing stock. Many buildings suffered at the hands of continued poverty and absentee landlords. In 1975, Guild leaders and volunteers joined with others to form the Near Northside Housing and Development Corporation, a nonprofit agency to help rebuild the area. Homes were purchased, renovated, and resold at reasonable prices to area residents. As the area began to improve its appearance, while retaining low housing prices and an excellent location, more middle-income people began to move into the area or to invest in it. New investment, however, brought higher prices, and as the 1980s began, people who had been forced out of Flytown by a freeway were now being forced out of the area known as Harrison West by demolition for a planned shopping center. The Guild couldn't sit on the sidelines. Organizing and logistical assistance were offered to neighborhood groups who opposed the Fifth Avenue Shopping Center, and in a stunning political victory, City Council was persuaded to reject the necessary rezoning by a vote of 4-3. In the bitter cold of the late 1970s winters, many area residents couldn't afford the skyrocketing utility rates. With Guild support, "Fight, Don't Freeze" became the motto, and the name of an ad hoc community group which negotiated with the gas company, lobbied state government, and played a leading role in developing a moratorium on shutoffs, help in paying bills, and weatherization programs. Camp Mary Orton came under scrutiny. With the changes in lifestyles and values, was the camp needed? With declining numbers of participants, deteriorating facilities, and encroaching development, could the Guild afford to keep the camp, or should it be sold? After much soul-searching and considerable input from the community, an easement was sold to developers, camp facilities were improved, and new programs developed for the participants and for non-guild users who now provided substantial revenue. As the 1980s unfolded, a new kind of park and playground designed in the 1970s was dedicated with the help of the Guild Board, the staff, and the community. Work on completing the Kilworth Park continues. Its design concept called for multi-purpose use by all age groups in a variety of interrelated activities, but it's still used mostly for climbing, running, and jumping by the youngsters and basketball by the older youth. In the mid-80s, it became clear that a great service need lay east of High Street, so Godman Guild East was opened at 234 East 5th Avenue. Today, the Guild's Board of Trustees, its staff, and supporters face new challenges, and yet many of the same ones that have always confronted this vital and dynamic agency. Balancing human needs against agency finances and human resources, maintaining a camp program that is relevant, useful, and manageable, helping meet recreational needs, focusing on basic needs, and keeping an active core of volunteers to help meet those needs. Engaging the larger community in positive ways, always providing the helping hands in just the right way at just the right time. Remembering that the children of the near north, many of them granddaughters and grandsons of Flytown residents, are the greatest resource we have. When they ask questions about their future, the Godman Guild's answer must be yes.